GST collections has hit a record high in the month of April at 2.1 lakh crore rupees, driven by a rise in domestic transactions, higher compliance in the backdrop of anti-evasion measures being taken up by authorities. The gross GST collections increased by 12.4% in the month of April. Now, after accounting for refunds, the net GST revenues for April of 2024 was at 1.92 lakh crore rupees, an increase of 17.1% from the corresponding period last year. This is the highest level of GST collection recorded since July of 2017, when the indirect tax regime came into being. The previous highest levels registered on GST were at 1.87 lakh crore in April of 2023, reflecting year-end sales as of March of 2023. This is the highest in the month of March of 2024 that indirect taxations have recorded in India. With me are Kartik Malhotra, Krishna Kumar. Kartik, hi. I'll begin with you first. I think there are two ways of reading this data. One, of course, is the start of the new financial year, so therefore better compliance come to think of it. That could be one of the reasons. April has always been an outlier when compared to other months in the year. But then also, many anti-evasion measures that the authorities have taken in the past 1 year seem to be bearing fruit.
Sure. So, I think let's break it up into three buckets, not two. One, of course, start of the year historically has seen better tax collection numbers for the government, which is both direct as well as indirect. Now, while anti-evasion measures, better compliance, more use of technology to understand if a GST registered number is not filing taxes, evading taxes, rebalancing of books, by way of understanding what is the amount of money which has hit a certain account, which is linked to a certain GST number, and whether the tax filed is as per that compliance or not. But I think the third and the more important bucket really is to look at GST collection in the context of India's real economic growth. And what is India's real economic growth? Real economic growth is the rate of growth at which India over the last 1 year has grown, which give or take, I think we should be able to agree between a number of 7% to 8%, right? Optimistically 8%, and that is what the aggregated data for the year of 2024, financial year 2024 states that about 8% is the likelihood, but with revised estimates coming, even on a pessimistic scale, consider a 7% growth rate. Now add to that inflation, and inflation coming in sticky enough at about 5 to 6% means that you are looking at an overall increase in prices and in consumption of both goods and services within the country, growing at about 12%. So a 12% growth in GST collection year on year, coming in line with an overall real economic growth of 12%, means that it is pretty much in line with what it should have been.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, you can add other aspects to it. For example, I think the government has been, in the entire financial year gone by and even till date, the government has been really pushy on sending tax notices, GST collection notices to companies across the board. So has that propelled, scared people to file advance taxes? Has that propelled companies to look at this whole tax regime far more seriously, not try and look for loopholes that, hey, for this particular input credit, maybe I can get away with a lower tax base. For a particular service, I may be able to get away with a lower, tax rate or something. So I think all these notices which have been dished out have created the sense of fear that if you don't comply, then whatever you are lacking on right now in your total, what you're required to pay to the government, that can come back to bite you really hard. So I think broadly, these are the reasons why we are seeing this uptick. But whatever may be the real underlying reason, I think anything excess of 2 lakh crores rupees in a month is not something we've seen before. And it's definitely a cause of rejoicing, if nothing else.
Cause of rejoice, at least for the government at this point in time. Whatever may be the reason, even if it comes on the back of a 12% growth in consumption year on year, the real GDP growth for the last 1 year, a 2 lakh crore mark passed in this month, in the month of April, only means that from here on, perhaps there'll be an uptick on indirect taxation and the collections figure.
Well, that's the hope. And again, as you rightly pointed out, April is the outlier. In fact, this 2 lakh crore rupee collection is essentially beating what was done in the April of 2023, so which was 1.87 lakh crore rupees. No other month in the last 12 months has seen 1.87 lakh crore rupees. So I would, take the April GST collections with a pinch of salt. But the hope is that with greater compliance and other factors that Karthik was talking about, the average rate of GST collections only keeps going up on a month-to-month basis. The one point that sticks out for me at this stage is that there is talk of that 6 to 7% growth rate and 5% of inflation that is taking place right now. What is interesting for me to note here is that despite that 5% inflation, the India consumption story has not taken a beating. The consumption story continues unabated. The high prices and the high inflation has also has not deterred the levels of consumption, and possibly pointing to better purchasing power parity that is happening in this country. So which means that more people are able to afford goods and services at an inflated price. So which is my interpretation of these numbers as well. So which is good. The only question here is that how much can this be sustained over a period of time for the rest of this financial year? That that is open to we'll have to wait and watch on that front. But what I will take from here is that for Indians, for the India story to continue, for India's GDP growth to continue, India's domestic consumption rates will have to continue unabated and in fact grow up much further as well. So, and for that to happen is the reason why you keep seeing the RBI consistently talking about the fact that the entire monetary policy stance will be fundamentally dependent upon whether we can bring that inflation figure in that 4% range. Now, the good part here is that even as the RBI attempts to bring that inflation number down to that 4% range, even at that 5% range, the consumption story is continuing.
Okay, and I want to stick to GST for a moment before we move ahead. And we are also in the midst of elections, and this is the time we talk about reforms. Reforms in GST by the way of rationalization of tax slabs, making it easier for people to actually comply, making that single window compliance for people who are filing GST, making it easier for traders. That has been one of the concerns, of course, that traders' bodies have raised over the past many months. But on the side of consumers, us the people, there's also a hope that perhaps petrol, electricity will be brought under GST, whether that will happen or not. I think it's time that we start talking about reforms, Karthik. It's been about 5 years now.
Yeah, so I think we have seen enough reforms, and we've seen these reforms come in little small packs, and we haven't really seen, ever since 2017 when GST was introduced, we haven't seen a real massive upgradation or a reset to the GST regime, and honestly I feel we don't need it.
Okay.
Now, getting petrol and getting power consumption or even alcohol for that matter under GST, while economically it may sound like a great idea, but
States
all
may not
it'll
like
do,
it very
yeah,
much.
so because all it'll do is maybe your 2.1 lakh crore rupees is going to I don't know, to just spit ball right now, go up to 3 lakh crore rupees. That's a great headline, and your tax figures, your GST figures start looking much sweeter than what they're looking right now. But the point is, every time GST is levied, it is shared between center and state. There is an IGST and there's a CGST component to GST, whereas fuel and alcohol, as well as power generation for that matter, continue to be great revenue drivers individually for states. So the fact that we have so far been able to at least get a buy-in from all states and continue with that buy-in by making these minor tweaks here and here on either rates or on or on greater compliance, as the case may be, I think really expecting the states to give up on this large chunk of revenue which accrues completely to them, which does not have to be shared with the center, is going to be an uphill climb. And honestly, I don't think there's a need really to do it at this moment.
Right, and to build that consensus among GST Council members will not be easy, has not been easy in the past as well when it comes to rationalization of tax